Hello, my name is June. I'm a videographer of sorts, and this video is going over my favorite lenses to use on the Fuji X-T4 for video. I bought the Fuji X-T4 primarily for video use, mainly actually for YouTube stuff is what I was thinking about, as well as capturing more personal moments, something that's a little bit lighter and quicker to set up and easier to take around. I've also always been a fan of Fuji JPEGs. I've owned the X-T1, the X-T2, and the X Pro 2, so I'm pretty familiar with classic chrome and Provia and whatnot. In this particular model, I really like the AF, so although I primarily purchased it for video, I did want to use its photo capabilities as well. And I'm starting off with that context because that influenced what lenses I decided to go for. So to start things off, I'm not really sure what level you're at in terms of video, but there is a stark difference between what you need in a photo lens and a video lens. Fujifilm's lineup of lenses definitely seem to be designed more with photography and stills in mind. You can tell from the way it performs with autofocus. It's very snappy, very jerky and jittery, and it prioritizes speed over smooth transitions. The design of the lenses also kind of make it difficult for manual focusing. A lot of the lenses I believe are fly-by-wire actually, which means that there aren't physical hard stops on either end, and the speed at which the focus changes is dependent on how fast you move the ring, which effectively makes it very difficult to repeat a movement or a rack focus. Within the world of photography as well, I believe that there's more emphasis on getting a sharper image. As a result, a lot of the lenses that come out from Fujifilm are very tack sharp, and a lot of the pixel peepers out there will be very satisfied when they're cropping into their images. Now, everything I've lined out from a video perspective is not really ideal. In terms of autofocus, you've probably heard it a million times, you want that smooth transition. You don't want anything that's jarring to the viewer or anything that distracts and takes away from the scene. Manual focusing is very nice to have a wide ring that can turn. If you have hard stops, even better, so you know when you're at infinity and you know when you're at minimum focus distance, and it's easy to kind of repeat motions or movements and practice rack focuses before you take your actual shot. One of the lenses we'll be talking about today, the 16mm f1.4, has a manual clutch mechanism which makes it very easy to switch between autofocus and manual focus. Things like that are very helpful. And lastly, I guess it is somewhat subjective. A lot of people do actually enjoy seeing sharp video. I personally don't. I think I like to shoot people a lot, so I find that it's less flattering if the image is far too sharp. I also just don't really like that sharp look. I prefer a more filmic, nostalgic, softer yet still detailed look, if that makes sense. So anyways, that's what I'm looking for in my lenses, and that is why I selected the lenses that I did. I guess one thing to mention is I didn't go for completely all manual lenses because I did want to take advantage of the X-T4's exquisite autofocus. And then obviously for the videos that I'm making for YouTube, taking advantage of autofocus is kind of key and very important to me. Alright, so diving into the lenses, the first one is the Fujifilm 16mm f1.4. This is a lens that I owned with my X-T1 and I used it every day. I think it was my only lens at the time actually. So I really liked it, I really got used to using it and becoming familiar with its quirks and everything about it. Back then, however, I was shooting a lot of stills, so it was a perfect lens and I didn't really have any problems with it. It was just a matter of becoming used to the 16mm or 24mm focal length. It's a little bit of an older lens, but I really liked it because of the clutch manual focus mechanism. I also really like the close focusing distance on it, and because it's one of the older lenses, I find that autofocus transitions is a lot smoother. And of course, on top of all of that, I just really enjoy the fact that I can shoot out f1.4, especially on a crop sensor camera. I believe it's been touted as one of Fujifilm's best lenses as well in terms of sharpness and rendering, and I would agree. I really like the images that I get out of this camera, both on a stills perspective and a video perspective. I believe it's also weather resistant, which would have informed my decision to buy it, except like it's slipping my mind right now whether or not it is. All around, wonderful lens. I really like the image that I'm getting out of it, and I like the focal length of 16mm, which is equivalent to 24mm on a full frame sensor. All of that being said, however, there are clear cons with this lens that make me kind of question its value to me. The X-T4's autofocus is extremely fast, and I can tell that the lens kind of struggles to keep up. It's just really loud when autofocus is. You can hear it kind of hunting, going back and forth, and it's like creaky floor type of experience. It is annoying, it really is. I don't think it's picked up by on-camera shotgun mics, but you can definitely hear it when you're just using the internal mics. But honestly, I think that's about it for cons. Everything else about it is pretty damn solid. Lens number 2, the 56mm f1.2, legendary lens amongst Fujifilm users as well. Really nice bokeh, really nice separation, super sharp. For photos, it's actually really fast for focusing after all these firmware updates and paired with the X-T4. I think back in the day, it used to be known as a really slow focusing lens, but now I've shot some sports stuff with it and it doesn't seem to have any problems there. I mean, other than the fact that you're shooting at f1.2 because you want to, but you really shouldn't. But yeah, the manual focus ring on the 56mm is very wide, like the 16mm, which in theory makes it a lot better, but it is fly-by-wire, so it's not really a pleasant manual focusing experience. This one as well, though, loud focusing. Again, I think it's just the trend of the older lenses from Fujifilm, and it gets very distracting. So again, that's my major con with this lens. But other than that, again, one of those lenses that I just really love the image that comes out of it. I really love the rendering, love the colors, the sharpness, and it just is nice. It's a great lens. And again, being able to shoot at f1.2, blessing. Third lens I like to use on my Fujifilm X-T4 is not any specific lens, but it's a line of lenses, and that's the Canon FD line. For Canon FD glass right now I have the 24mm, the 20-35, the 50, and the 70-210. Of these lenses, I generally only use the 24mm or the 20-35, just because when you're using adapted vintage glass on the Fuji X-T4, you have to switch the focal length for the IBIS to compensate. I think I have it set to 24mm, and when I pop on my 24mm, it's perfect, no problems there. But the second I pop on something with a longer focal length, such as my 50mm or my 70-210, it's better if you switch that setting, and I don't know, I just find it to be a pain, especially when I'm trying to switch on the fly, so I end up just using the wider lenses. As much as I love the rendering and image that's coming out of the 16mm and the 56mm, there's just something about the colors that come out of a Canon FD lens paired with the X-T4. It definitely seems a lot softer overall, the image, but I still think it retains a lot of detail, so I like the look personally. The blacks do become a bit faded, however, so I probably would add a little bit more in post. But when you compare footage shot with Fujifilm glass versus these Canon FD lenses, there's just a bit of character that's lost when you're using the Fujifilm lenses, in my opinion. Ultimately, I think just the Fujifilm glass looks a lot more digital, a little bit more clinical perhaps, and the Canon FD has a little bit more character, a little bit more filmic, and just has imperfections that gives it a look that I personally like. Now, the nice thing about Canon FD glass is that it's not too different of a shooting experience when you're shooting with Fujifilm glass because it has aperture rings. The manual focus rings are a little bit actually on the thinner end, so I do wish that they were a little bit thicker, but they're still great for manual focus. The focus throw, which is just how far you have to turn the ring from the closest distance to the farthest distance, is relatively short on the Canon FD glass, which I actually prefer because oftentimes I do want to make fine adjustments or quick adjustments from close to far, and I really like that experience. Paired with the Fuji X-T4, you do get the benefit of IBIS. I'm not completely sold on the Fuji X-T4 IBIS. Mind you, I haven't updated to the latest firmware. I think it's 1.3. I think I'm at 1.2. Apparently it addresses some IBIS issues, but largely remains the same. There's a lot of warping in the corners, but I think if you're very careful with how you're shooting, then you can maximize the benefit of having IBIS. And of course, the glaring issue with Canon FD glass is that you have to be shooting manually in manual focus. So you're not going to be able to take advantage of the Fuji X-T4's autofocus, which, like I said before, is very important to me. Now, I want to go over which lenses I use the most and why, but before that, I just want to mention a couple of other options. I think for a lot of budget shooters, you're going to inevitably be looking at the f2 counterparts. So that's probably the 23 f2, the 35 f2, the 50 f2, and actually I think there's a 16-8. If you're on a budget, honestly, those lenses will do you great wonders anyways. Regardless, I think with AF, they're going to be a lot faster, perhaps a bit more snappy and less smooth, but you still get speed, and to my knowledge, you get silence, or at least a lot quieter than these older lenses from Fujifilm. Now, personally, even on the still side, I've never liked the f2 lenses. I did appreciate it from an autofocus standpoint, but I've never really liked the images that I would get out of the camera. I just didn't like the colors. Something about it overall just looked very clinical and boring to me. The 1.4 counterparts, though older, I think they just have a much nicer I don't know, just it looks better to my eye, that's it. I've heard a lot of things about the 18-55 kit lens, and everybody swears by it, says it's amazing. I wasn't so attracted to it just because of the variable aperture. I've always shot with zoom lenses and I love the convenience of it, and I'll probably go back to a zoom lens at one point, but I shot with the 24-105 on Canon F4 for a while and I just hated F4. I hated being stuck at F4. I find myself in a low light situation quite often, so I just didn't go for that lens. The 16-55 2.8, I had it paired with the X-H1 back in the day. Really liked that lens as well. But honestly, sometimes I just felt stifled by 2.8. Again, I think I just get myself into a lot of low light situations, and I've shot with smaller sensor cameras for so long that I've missed bokeh, and I'm just trying to get faster lenses to compensate for that. I haven't tried it in the newer lenses like the 8-16, I believe, or 8-18mm, nor have I tried the 80mm macro, but I do remember the 90mm f2. I paired that with my X-T1 and I loved that lens. It was just amazing in terms of this autofocus speed. I love the focal length, the colors, the rendering. Again, it's just one of those lenses that I think is phenomenal that comes out of Fujifilm, and I might have actually found more success with that lens compared to the 56 1.2 because it has that linear focusing motor system or something. But I ended up with the 56mm, and honestly I'm happy with that lens too. Alright, so returning to my lens collection and what I'm using, I find myself reaching for the 16mm just as much as I reach for the 56mm. Lately, however, the videos that I've been shooting suits the 85mm a little bit more, shooting at f1.2, relying on autofocus, just getting a nice reasonably compressed background and good fall off with the depth of field. And if I'm going out and about, I'm reaching for the 16mm a lot more just because I don't know if I'll need that wider angle, and it's just a solid all-around lens. Now, I much prefer the look that the Canon FD glass gives me, but in how I'm using the camera lately, I just don't want to deal with having to manual focus everything. A lot of these shots I'm shooting myself, or they're very run and gun and just out and about, just capturing personal moments, and sometimes I just want to point the camera and have it act similar to a point and shoot. So just for the convenience factor alone, I do find myself not reaching for the Canon FD glass that often. However, if I had the choice, I would definitely grab the FD over any Fujifilm glass. A, because they're insanely cheap. I bought my 24mm for $100. I bought my 70-210 for $50. They're very, very cheap in comparison to Fujifilm glass. So in conclusion, those are the lenses that I'm using and the lenses that I personally love to use. Definitely the Fuji X-T4 in my capacity, however, is not being used as a professional camera for gigs. It's being used as a personal camera and as a YouTube camera, which is, I think, has very different needs. If your only setup is a 24mm and an 85mm equivalent, you're not going to be able to cover a lot of ground. You can make it work, but I don't think it's very ideal. I think you'd be better served by a 16-55mm 2.8 if you're trying to use it for a professional capacity, and if you're using it even more casually than I am, then an 18-55 will serve you perfectly. But anyways, that's it from me today. Again, these are just personal selections, and I'm trying to share the reasoning behind it and what I like about each lens selection and why. I really think that people get too caught up in gear and it kind of inhibits them from creating great content. So I hope that this video doesn't do that to you. If anything, I just hope that this video acts as an example of how to think of or how to approach buying gear. Try to buy gear that you'll actually use and that makes sense in your workflow. And that's why I emphasize that I'm not trying to use it in a professional capacity. I'm trying to use it in a way that I enjoy. And these lenses, I particularly enjoy the look that they give me. I enjoy the shooting experience, and that's why I chose them. So hope that gives you something to think about. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you like, comment, subscribe, all that kind of stuff, that would help the channel out. This channel is definitely more gear centric, but if you do want to check out my other channel, it's a little bit more personal thoughts, a little bit more slow, less gear than this channel. But yeah, have a wonderful day. Hope you enjoyed the video. Bye bye.